All right, everybody, it's just about 6 o'clock. We appreciate everybody joining us today. These are our virtual hurricane forums. We started doing these last year in person. This year, very similar. We're going to give you a talk on hurricanes, what you can expect in our area in terms of general preparedness, whether you're new to the area or you've been here for a long time and been through past storms. Zach has joined me. He's the town manager for the town of Cape Carteret. Really appreciate him joining us. My name is Eric Hayden. I'm the warning coordination meteorologist with the Weather Service out of the Newport office. Just some quick housekeeping things, and then we'll turn it over to Zach for a little bit more about what the town of Cape Carteret has to offer in terms of preparedness. Your microphones have been muted, so you can kind of sit back and relax and don't worry about anything. If you're on a PC, your screen looks like this. You'll have the ability to ask a question. So at any point, if you have a question, type it into the chat box and we'll get to it at the very end. You can also raise your hand at the end and ask a question that way. If you have a mobile device, Android, iPhone, iPad, you can do the same thing. If you swipe left or right, you can have full screen presentation or full screen us presenting. Either way, there's a real easy way to ask questions through the webinar feature throughout the presentation itself. At the very end, probably about 30-35 minutes into it, we're going to turn it over to you. Both Zach and myself will go through all the questions that are asked, and then we'll turn on your microphones for anybody that wants to ask a verbal question. If you're having a technical issue, if you have a neighbor that wanted to join and missed it, if everything works out, we're going to record, or we are recording this right now, and we will post this to YouTube by tomorrow morning. So you'll be able to sit back and watch the presentation as well. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Zach. He's going to talk a little bit more about what the town has to offer. If you do have other towns that are on, anybody is welcome to join us. If you're interested in hosting something like this, it's very easy to do. Just reach out to me. You'll have our email address at the end. And all that we ask you do is to promote the class itself and then share anything that the town has in terms of general preparedness. So at this point, Zach, I'll turn it over to you. We can see your screen. I see the NHC forecast on there. So just pull up your PowerPoint and you'll be good to go.
All right. See, you can see that pretty well.
Perfect. Yep.
All right, good deal. Let me close this up so I can see the presentation. Let's see.
It's a little harder. I think Zach's working on the one screen. It's more challenging for sure.
Okay, there we go.
Good on it.
Okay. So as Eric mentioned, I'm Zach Steffi. I'm the town manager in Cape Carteret. So just want to run through and share with y'all a little bit of background information on what we do for hurricane preparation in Cape Carteret and some of the resources that we utilize. Starting off, we do have a weather station at Town Hall. Gives us some really solid information. Probably seen it if you've headed down Dolphin Street. You can see it on the top of the building. This is just one of the examples here. This was a storm that took place back in June where we had about 5.5 inches of rainfall in the course of just over an hour. So it's really useful to be able to go back and kind of see that data afterwards and analyze the storms after the fact. Looking at that same storm, we had this kind of washout issue that came up in town from that 5.5 inches of rain. So it helps us to plan for the future. We know, what a event of that intensity is going to do and some of the results and impacts that it'll have on us. One of the other benefits is that it also does some lightning tracking. So for our events we hold in town, we're able to sort of track how far away those lightning strikes are hitting and to kind of make some forecasting decisions on whether to move forward or not with the event based off of that. Also want to show you all the Emergency Operations Center. So during a hurricane event, all of us are up at Town Hall, which serves as our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center. So this was during the past hurricane that we had a couple weeks ago that we mobilized the EOC. We typically have members of our police department up there, and I'm up there as well, along with some of our public works staff. So we're up there for the entire duration of the storm. During Hurricane Florence, we were up there for several days on end there, and basically living, working all out of Town Hall as the EOC. And typically, if the conditions permit, we're out there and kind of monitoring what the status is of the storm surge, identifying, if we're having road washouts, and just doing whatever we can to make sure that we're ensuring public safety during the storm event. And there's a couple good ways to stay connected with the town. We have Constant Contact, which is an email listserv. It's right there on the town website, www.townofcapecarteret.org. If you scroll down to the bottom, you can sign up, put in your email, your first name, last name, and check which types of emails interest you. You can also check out the town website, follow the town's Instagram, like the town's Facebook page, or follow the town on Twitter. So a number of different ways to get information from us. Typically, before a storm event, we're sharing a lot of information on our Facebook page and getting that information out through that platform. As it becomes more clear that a threat is imminent and that it looks like it's going to have some substantial impacts to us, we also start putting that out on Instagram, and the emails will start as well. So those are just some of the ways that we're able to kind of prepare for hurricane events and keep everybody informed on what's going on. And as Eric mentioned at the end of the presentation, once he wraps it up, be happy to answer any questions anybody has and share any information. Just wanted to share some of the things we do. We have a great relationship with the National Weather Service, and I appreciate Eric putting this on this evening.
All right, Zach, thank you very much. I'll take back control, so you'll be good to go. Really appreciate that information. Those are a lot of good links. I live in Cape Carteret myself, so I have to sign up for some of that. And a lot of it, I'm at work and I know a lot weather-wise, but I'm sure some of the other alerts that they send out would be very, very useful. So we certainly appreciate everything the town does on that front as well. So this next bit, again, 25 to 30 minutes, is going to focus on impacts of tropical cyclones that we can get. Hang tight. Zach and I will be on together at the end, again, to take any questions that you have in terms of tropical weather or weather in our area across eastern North Carolina. Big focus on this presentation is going to be water. That is what, unfortunately, is the biggest killer in tropical cyclones. Zach already mentioned the town monitoring storm surge, and there's a reason for that. Storm surge and rainfall flooding, two of our biggest killers with any cyclone. The time really is to prepare now. If you see this presentation from us in May, June, July, says the same thing. Hurricane season starts June 1st and goes through the end of November. Unfortunately, here in eastern North Carolina, we can get storms as early as May. The middle of this past year, we had Tropical Storm Arthur, and in the beginning part of August, we had Hurricane Isaias that made landfall down to our south and west, but we certainly saw some wind and rainfall from that. We've had storms near the peak of the season. This graph right here, the orange or darker shading of reddish orange, are the frequency of hurricanes and tropical storms. It peaks about September 9th or 10th. So either side of that day, Dorian and Florence in the last 2 years. And then it kind of tails off as we head into the latter part of fall. That is because the water cools off. With that said, if we get through this next week or two, don't let your guard down. Don't say, hey, we've already had our 2 storms for the year. We're done. We've had Matthew in October as well as Sandy. So please don't let your guard down. And for our newer residents, let them know that. Maybe you've lived here 20 years and you know that if we get into September that we're certainly not out of the woods. The person that just moved down from Ohio or Wisconsin, they may not know that. So this is the type of information we really want you sharing with your neighbor. There's a lot of good information on the website. Zach mentioned some of the town resources. For the Weather Service, weather.gov/moreheadcity, that will bring you to our main page. And then if you put a /hurricane prep, brand new website we made this past spring. It's modeled off of Hurricane Awareness Week. So we have tons of information, how to prepare your house, how to do an insurance checkup, something that you want to do weeks and months in advance. Do you need to evacuate? There's a campaign with North Carolina called Know Your Own Zone. All that information is on there. Any graphic, any piece of information you need is on that website. If you're a local municipality, a business, an HOA, a church, take those graphics and share them, because again, they don't do any good just sitting on our website, and they don't do good if they're just there and they're not shared in our community. So please use that information. One of the biggest things we do during a big storm is we send out weather briefings to people like Zach and Jen at Carteret County and folks across the county. So our core partners get these briefings. A very similar, and in some cases the same briefing, is available for you on our website. Again, weather.gov/moreheadcity. If you scroll to the bottom, we have a whole bunch of these icons, winter weather, current weather, but there's one called weather hazard briefing, and that has our latest briefing if there's bad weather. it's a sunny day, we're not expecting severe weather, a winter storm or a hurricane, it's not going to have anything. But prior to Isaias, Florence, Dorian, even the winter storm we had back in 2018, we have a PDF briefing on the website, and that is for you to look at. Zach did a great job mentioning that the town's on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Same thing. We're not on Instagram yet. We're working on it. In fact, we should be on it by this fall as one of the test offices in the Weather Service. We are on YouTube. This video will be on YouTube. Any of the briefings we do to our partners, we usually do a video briefing, 5 to 10 minutes, a little more thorough. We'll go over information, and then we put that on YouTube for the general public to see. And we really use social media as a way to cut through the noise. And I kind of chuckle when I say that because there's a lot of forecasts out there. There's a lot of people that are into the weather, and they share a lot of information. And sometimes too much information is not a good thing. You know, Zach and I were talking prior to this about people talking about storms weeks in advance, well beyond the science. So please stick to official sources. We're looking at all that information out to 2 weeks, but we don't start sharing things with you until you need to worry about it. But as far as hurricane preparedness goes, that can start today. I mentioned the social media. Here's our tweet from prior to Florence. A lot of people in the media were, asking us prior to Florence, hey, it's only going to be a 1 now. Should we let our guard down? And in this presentation, you're going to see one thing that we harp on is to not focus on the category. And that's where we use social media to tell folks, hey, don't let your guard down. Our impacts have not changed. We still expect a lot of rain. So social media is a real good way for us to kind of cut through the noise to really promote official sources of information. All right, so that's a little bit of the homework, weather.gov/moreheadcity. If you add hurricane prep to that page, you can get a lot of preparedness information. This is one of my favorite graphics. The men and women down at the Hurricane Center are awesome. We always get teased as meteorologists. It's the only job you can have and be wrong all the time, or you can be paid to get it wrong. I've heard all the jokes, but to be honest, the men and women down at the Hurricane Center are some of the best forecasters in the world. I think it was less than a mile or two, the forecast track with Laura at 96 hours. It's incredible. And that's not just a one-hit storm. With Florence and Dorian, a very accurate forecast track. So please pay attention to those official sources of information. The one on the left, you probably laugh at, the spaghetti models. If you're into the weather, I know you've heard of it. Or if you haven't seen, the analogy spaghetti, you've seen all these lines. And it can be useful when you know how to use it, but sometimes I think it just makes us look like we don't know what we're doing. But what those lines are different model solutions of what could happen. So a forecaster that uses it, if the lines are really, really clustered together, like on the far right hand of the graphic, that means that model after model after model show the same solution, so our confidence is high. As you get farther out into time and they spread, those are the whole range of possibilities. But unfortunately, people will only look at the one model that hits them or misses them and just say, hey, I don't have to worry about it, or there's just something I should worry about. The men and women at the Hurricane Center look at all of that, and they do what's called a consensus forecast. They look at the European model. They look at the GFS model. They look at all of them, and they take a consensus or an average of what they think is going to happen and make slight tweaks. For example, with Laura, one of the more popular models on the internet is the European model that had the storm hitting Houston. And if the Hurricane Center were to go back and forth with every model run, somebody like Zach and Jen at Carteret, they can't make evacuation plans based on something going back and forth. So the Hurricane Center makes calculated small adjustments to the forecast with time, and it's proven to be very, very accurate. You might say, well, where's the proof? This is a graphic comparing Floyd to Dorian in 2019 to 1999. So back in 1999, if you've lived here for a long time, that was kind of our benchmark flood of record for a lot of us prior to Florence. The graphic is showing the average error at day 3. So in 1999, if we were going to say where was Floyd going to hit, our average error would be somewhere across eastern Georgia, almost all of South Carolina, and most of North Carolina and Southern Virginia. So a huge area. And can you imagine folks trying to make evacuation decisions based on, that's just our average. 3 days out, it could be that wide. With Dorian, the average error is shrunk down to just southeastern North Carolina. And I'm sure you've seen this with Dorian and Florence, and then with Laura just hitting the Gulf Coast recently. The accuracy of the forecast has gotten to be really, really good. With that said, there's a few things I want to caution you about, and I'll talk about one of them with the forecast cone. While we've improved our forecasting immensely with track, there's no doubt about that, we still struggle with the intensity forecast. We know usually it's going to be a hurricane, or it's going to develop, it's going to be a 1 or 2, but sometimes they may jump up to a 3 or 4 really quickly. We know what ingredients are in place: low shear, warm water, things like that. But sometimes storms take off, other times they don't. So I want to leave you with this slide. 3 days before landfall, our nation's most powerful hurricanes was the Labor Day hurricane in 1933, Andrew in the early 90s, and Camille. 3 days before that, they were only tropical storms. And all of these tracks were roughly across southern Florida or in the southern Gulf and into the Gulf of Mexico. So you may not remember it as much up in our area because we weren't as impacted. But think about where our storms come from, usually the Bahamas down toward the Caribbean, and they can easily come up the coast. So when we're preparing for a storm, don't focus too much on just the category, because it can change, and kind of keep that into your plans in terms of whether or not to leave and what local officials are saying. So please keep that in mind. So bottom line, make your plan today. You don't want to be waiting until, wow, now it's up to be a 3. Where do I go? What do I do? You want that plan in order. If I'm going to stay, this is what I need: a week's worth of medicine, food, water. If I'm going to go, where am I going to go? Do I have a southern route to go to and a northern route to go to? I'm lucky. I have family in South Carolina and Maryland, so I send my kids and my wife north or south, depending on what the storm is. These are discussions you need to have today. You don't want to decide the morning of, the night before, when everybody else is leaving at the same time. So please, make those plans today. The next couple slides are going to go over some information at the national level. One of the best resources, and I know the town of Cape Carteret shares this a lot, which we appreciate, hurricanes.gov. It's the National Hurricane Center. You can get to it a million different ways, but hurricanes.gov is an easy way to remember. One thing that they've been sharing, as we have, the Tropical Weather Outlook. It's issued 4 times a day. This shows the potential for formation of cyclones in the next 4 days. And there's different categories. There's a low, which is shaded in yellow, the orange, which is a medium chance, and then the red would be a high chance, greater than 60%. And that shaded area just shows the formation area for the next 5 days of where that can occur. This is a really good first look. I know a lot of people like to share computer models really, really far out, but that's something we call deterministic. That's a one run might have it, and the next run it doesn't. That doesn't really help for planning purposes. Use this. Hey, there's some waves coming off of Africa. That's a little kick in the butt. Maybe I should make sure my hurricane plan is all ready to go. So use that for many, many days down the road. As we get closer, I'm sure you're familiar with this. I want to talk a little bit about what the forecast cone means and doesn't mean. I'm going to try to explain it really clearly, because sometimes people get confused, and even at first it had to be explained to me. This forecast cone only shows the most probable path for just the center of the storm. It says nothing about the impacts. So as you get closer in time, the cone is going to shrink, because statistically our accuracy improves as we get closer. So with Florence, the cone continues to shrink, but New Bern was on the edge of the cone. It meant that the center wasn't going to go by New Bern, but obviously they had storm surge flooding. So please keep that in mind. Just shows the most probable path. And this is actually calculated before the start of the year. 2/3 of the time, it's going to go in this path itself. The error is calculated at 12 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours, and that's how the cone is created. It has nothing to do with how big or little the storm is. It's just based on our statistical error at those certain points. So 2/3 of the time, it's going to stay in it, the center. 1/3 of the time, it's going to go out. So my point with the cone is, if you're anywhere in the general vicinity of it, you should pay attention. Number one, even if we're right with the center, when is the last time a hurricane just struck one location? It's not just the center, it's hundreds of miles across. And number two, sometimes we may err and get it wrong, and it could go outside of that cone. So you need to be prepared. The biggest thing though, again, impacts occur well away from the center of the storm. So We saw that with recent storms like Matthew. You know, the center never made landfall in the Carolinas, but we certainly had some catastrophic flooding to our west over toward Duplin County. So the cone graphic is great. You should pay attention to it if you're anywhere in the vicinity of it, not just in the cone or not. It's not an in or out thing. It's really a near thing. A couple other graphics you may be a little less familiar with. One is the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds. That's roughly when you should be inside. You know, emergency officials start to hunker down. This is a reasonable worst case scenario. So when we say this, if you get your plans done, your house is boarded up, you've left by this time, you're going to be okay. This is a reasonable worst case scenario to plan for. If you want to know the most likely time for the tropical storm force winds, we've got that graphic. And you'll notice that they're kind of far apart. And then as we get closer to the event, they'll get close together. So earliest reasonable is, hey, if I'm done by this time, I'm good to go. Most likely is drop dead. I've got to be done by then, because that's when the winds are expected to pick up. So since it's a hurricane course and preparedness class, we got to talk about the Saffir-Simpson scale. Very, very popular in terms of ranking hurricanes, but it is only related to wind. It's not down to downplay wind. We saw what Hurricane Laura did with wind speed. Wind speed can be deadly and certainly very damaging, but historically that's not what kills people. So I really want you to use the hurricane scale just as part of your planning, not the end all be all. Raise your hand if you've heard a neighbor or a friend say, I'm not gonna leave unless it's a 2. I'm not gonna leave unless it's a 3. Don't get in that mindset, because number one, no two storms are alike. Depending on where it hits, if you're on the left or right side, that makes sometimes more of a difference in what the category is. And again, it only tells you about the wind. You could have a tropical storm that sits over us and produces 30 inches of rain. It would have no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on a ranking scale because it's just a tropical storm, and you would have issues. So respect it. I'm not saying if it's a 3 or 4, say, Eric said, don't worry about the category. No. Eric said it's only part of the puzzle. It's not the whole thing. If you get anything out of this virtual presentation, other than the links Zach and I mentioned, please promote to not focus on just the category of the storm. It gets more people into trouble than probably anything else. It's really all about the impacts. Since 2010, in terms of category 1 storms, we've had 175 people die in over $100 billion storms. So just the one, have you heard of Sandy, Irene, Matthew, Florence, Dorian, the ones that have impacted us as ones. So again, please remember that the category only speaks to wind. It's more than just wind. A cyclone can produce a lot of things. Wind is important, but we're going to go over in chronological order what has been the most important in terms of loss of life: rainfall, storm surge, rip currents, wind, and then tornadoes, as we saw with Dorian just across the shore from us in Emerald Isle. Water is what kills. The statistics from 1963 to 2012, about half are storm surge, another third are rain. So when you combine that with surf, that's about 90% of deaths are water related. Can you get a fallen tree on a house or a car and somebody dies? Yes. Can you die from a tornado? Yes. It's more likely, however, with a tropical cyclone that it's going to be water. And you might say, well, Eric, this is 2020. It's been 8 years since 2012. Do you have new stats for us? And we do. The last couple of years, 83% were water related. So again, that stat hasn't really changed. We have made some improvements. There's something called a storm surge watch and warning. We were a test office a couple years ago. There haven't been many storm surge related deaths. We didn't have it in Dorian or Florence, and both are amazing when you consider the surge we saw in New Bern and then over toward Ocracoke with Dorian. Unfortunately, we still have a lot of issues with people in cars. During the last 3 seasons, more than half are people in vehicles. So it's not that they're in Cape Carteret and the sound comes up unexpectedly and they didn't realize it. It's that they want to go out to the store and they go around that barricade, or they're traveling at night and they don't realize that the road is washed out. So it's not that the water comes up suddenly in the vehicle related deaths. Unfortunately, it's a lot of times folks going out at night not knowing how bad the situation is. So that's an important point. As you return to the town, as you return to our area, don't take shortcuts. Your life can be just as much at risk after the storm. Carbon monoxide issues, you're returning on flooded roads, issues with falling from ladders, cutting trees down, that type of thing. So keep your guard up even after the storm itself. We're trying to do a better job at being in the community and being better communicators. It's going to be hard to improve the science much more. We'll continue to try, but I mentioned a mile or two difference with the track of Laura. That's incredible. With Florence, on the left is the 5-day rainfall forecast, 5 days out, how much rain was going to fall. And then the observed is on the right. So, you know, you can look at the color bar, but a tremendous amount of rain. The location was good, but we still had, unfortunately, 17 deaths, and 16 of those were in vehicles in the Carolinas. So please remember that. Our big campaign with that is Turn Around, Don't Drown. This is an image from Hookerton. It's to our northwest during Matthew. Sometimes it's obvious, flowing water, you know, hey, I shouldn't cross it. But other times you don't know how deep it is because you don't know if the road is like this. We saw many washouts where the road is no longer existing. So it's not just the velocity of the water. It takes about 18 inches to move a car. But it's the fact that the road may not be there as well. So respect those barricades, just stay home, stay off the roads. And again, if you encounter water, turn around, don't drown. Please do not cross through flooded roads. That's where most people get into issues. Some of the products we issue, you're probably familiar with the flash flood watch and warning. If you'll get those on your phone if it's a really, really bad one. And if you get one that says flash flood emergency, those are catastrophic events. Those are ones that are very rare. We usually only issue those during tropical weather, where somebody like Zach or somebody from the town level has said, yes, we're doing water rescues. It really is that bad. And then we would put out the flash flood emergency to alert folks. You may or may not be familiar with this one, storm surge watch and warning. This started a couple years ago, and storm surge is a rapid rise of water. You can see the lower left, the video from Ocracoke. Just amazing. They had 4 to 7 feet of surge in 10 to 20 minutes. It just came up very, very quick. That is from Dorian, and then the upper left is Newbern. So again, Zach, we might have new people in the community. You know, we've experienced this on Bogue Sound, 2 to 4 feet. With Florence, 8 to 11 up the Neuse River in Newbern. And we had 1,800 rescues inland from the surge from Dorian. So, you know, please keep that in mind that storm surge can be very, very powerful. One of the products we issue, I mentioned a storm surge watch. That's for life-threatening surge of 3 feet or greater, and a warning means it is imminent within 36 hours. You may have heard the term above normally dry ground. We get a lot of questions about that. You know, what does that mean? Is it above mean low water, mean high water? You know, what type of datum are you using? And that's one of the reasons why we changed. What it means is low-lying areas. If you live along Bogue Sound, if you live along the ocean itself, over in Swansboro, up the White Oak River, if you're in a low-lying area that normally is dry, you're going to have 2, 3, 4 feet of water inundation in those areas. We give a worst-case scenario, so it's just somewhere in that area we'll see that. That's for evacuation and planning purposes, and that does not include wind action. So if you're lucky to have a nice house on the water and you're overlooking it, and the water, you know, you're on open face with the wind direction, waves will even pile on top of that. So that's something to remember when we're talking about surge. With the Hurricane Center, we'll share these graphics. I'm sure Zach has seen these, and folks in the community. I'll never forget. I think it was near Ocean or Town of Bogue. It wasn't Cape Carteret, but it's right on our border along Highway 24 from Goose Creek. We had some flooding along 24, and one gentleman said they evacuated, and the reason why was those surge values of 8 to 14 feet, 8 to 13, whatever we were forecasting with Florence. You can get those values from the website. It'll be on the Hurricane Center website and ours, and this is the potential for storm surge flooding. It's a reasonable worst case scenario, and again, not everyone in that area will see it, but that's kind of the extent of what could happen and why we want people, we don't tell people to leave, but how we tell the local officials how bad it could be so they can make their evacuation planning and things like that. Something new this year, a couple more slides, then we'll wrap things up, is a peak storm surge. That prior map is great to kind of dial down into your neck of the woods, but if you just kind of want the 50,000 foot level, how much are we going to see oceanfront? In Emerald Isle, let's say, in this map, 4 to 7 feet south of Cape Lookout. So this is something that we're using on social media, and we welcome comments because it is an experimental graphic that started this year. So we first talked about surge and we talked about flooding, because again, water, water, water in terms of deaths. Don't let your guard down with rip currents. Last year, the most deadly or second deadliest storm was actually Lorenzo. You might say, I remember Dorian, I remember Florence a couple years ago, I don't remember Lorenzo. Well, it was actually the most powerful, the northernmost Category 5 hurricane in the Atlantic Ocean. We had 4 deaths in North Carolina alone and 8 rip current related deaths up and down the east coast. It was well out to sea, but these distant storms can produce dangerous rip currents and swell. We're going to see a little bit of it with Nana, the tropical storm that's off our coast now. But again, these big storms can produce rough surf. Please keep that in mind. This is where, not to pick on our friends from Raleigh or out of state, but we know the beach pretty well because we live here. We know what the flags mean. We know to respect the lifeguards and to stay out of the water when it's red flag conditions. For somebody that pays a lot of money to come down to the beach, and this is their 1 week, they may not know those issues. So share that with them that, hey, I know it's sunny and it's 85 and we don't have any hurricane warnings, but there's dangerous rip currents today, that type of thing. So please help us get out that message. The big thing with rip currents, teach your kids this. My kids go to White Oak and Broad Creek, so I'm right in town. Any weather presentation, we talk about this. Know how to get out of a rip current. Swim left or right or parallel. Don't fight the current. It's a very, very narrow stream. It's a break in the sandbar. If you're swimming back straight to shore, you're swimming right against it. And that's when people get into trouble trying to fight the rip current itself. We've tried to improve our messaging with a lot of information on social media. This is an example from where we had a high risk day. We were especially concerned because it was going to be a nice beach weather day. Those are our big ones. If it's raining and storming, you're not going to be on the beach. But if it's sunny and 85, people may not realize that there's high risk for rip currents without those big waves and obvious things they may think that are occurring. So as we go down the list, a couple more, and again, get your questions ready. I see a couple popping into the chat. So if you have something that comes up, otherwise we'll turn it over to you here at the end. Wind is an issue. This is from my neighborhood in Cape Carteret. We have people boarding up, doing what they needed to do. And unfortunately, because of the duration with Florence, we had a lot of people that lost a tremendous amount of shingles. So even though we're up high, we had a lot of flood damage or water damage through the roof and things of that nature. So it was really the wind duration with Florence. 70 to 80 mile per hour winds, nothing to sneeze at, but it was the fact that it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and even breezy on that Sunday. And then the ground was real saturated, so trees were gradually getting weaker with time. So the category scale shows us wind speed, but again, to re-emphasize, it does not show all the impacts. Just raise your hand in the background if you remember Hurricane Arthur, not the tropical storm we had this year. It was 2014, category 2. So remember it was a 2. Similar landfall near Cape Lookout, a fast moving storm, and it was kind of a compact small storm. So we did have almost 100 mile per hour gusts on the Outer Banks. They did have some surge issues. So our friends up there, they did have some issues, but for our whole area here in Carteret County, some winds, especially down east, but the western end of the county, 40 to 50, not really a big deal, and winds under 30 inland. So Arthur, not really a big deal unless you live from Morehead City and especially east. But it was a category 2, small and fast moving. If you've been lucky to live here this long, do you remember Hurricane Irene? Just a 1. So again, it was lower on the category scale, no tricks. It also hit near Cape Lookout, a very, very similar landfall, much slower moving storm, much larger storm. So they still had issues, especially off to the east of the center. So down East Carteret County, portions of the Pamlico Sound, like Pamlico County and Beaufort County. But notice inland, 70 mile per hour winds up toward Greenville. Our western part of the county saw 65 to 70 mile per hour winds, and we had a tremendous amount of rainfall as well. So just to reemphasize, respect the category, but don't just focus on it. Don't think a 1 or a tropical storm can't do damage and have issues in our area. Still have that plan ready. I know you remember this if you lived here last year. I still remember it because, again, I live in Cape Carteret, so we were watching these storms from work. Unfortunately, we had an EF2 tornado over in Emerald Isle. Isolated areas of damage can occur with any cyclone. It could be a tropical storm. Those first outer bands that get here, the ones that kick up the wind, kick up the rain, and then it calms down, that up and down type of thing, that's where we can start to get our first tornadoes. So they can occur well away from landfall. So keep that in mind when you're doing your planning purposes. And they often produce areas of enhanced damage. We saw this in Florence. We had that general wind across the whole area, but then you'd go somewhere where hundreds of trees were down in a narrow area, and that was produced by tornadoes. Florence, kind of getting, as we wrap things up, the impacts occur well away from the center. The landfall was down by Wrightsville Beach. We were on the right side of the storm, so we saw a lot of that wind and surge action. But look at all these tornadoes. We had a lot across eastern North Carolina, all the way up to Richmond, and the landfall was in Wrightsville Beach. So just to re-summarize, don't just focus on the category, focus on all of the impacts. And please remember, when you're looking at that forecast cone, just talking about where we think the center is going to go, impacts can be hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And if you remember, just look at that Florence example, tornadoes up toward Richmond, despite the landfall being down near Wilmington, North Carolina. So at this point, we're going to turn it over to you. I've got my email address on there, eric.hayden@noaa.gov. We're in the community a lot, given the current situation, not as much. But if you have a student interested in weather, if you're elementary, middle, or high school would like a science presentation, we'll just do it this way. We've done Google Hangouts and Skype and the whole thing. So we're treating this like nothing's changed. I might be at my house and not at work doing it, but we are still here to serve you. So please reach out to us. If you're a local church or maybe another municipality is on here and you want to host one of these, just reach out to me. All we like you to do is speak in the beginning about what your town or organization is doing for preparation, and then be on at the end for a Q&A, which Zach is getting ready to do with us. Everything looks like it recorded, Zach, so we'll have this online tomorrow morning, and then we'll just email that out, and through his town social media channels and ours, we'll make sure you get a copy of that. And anybody that signed up, I've got your email, so we can just email it to you. So at this point, I'm going to look at the questions, Zach. I'll save all the hard ones for you. So I'll see if we got any. Questions. And at this point, raise your hand if you want to ask an audio question. If you accidentally raise your hand, and you don't want to ask a question, just lower it, because I will be calling on you if your hand is still up. So we'll go through. Let's see. I don't see any in there yet. So let's see if we've got any hands raised. All right, so I don't see any yet. We'll give another minute or two. Zach, I'm going to hop out of the presentation to just show the website real quick. We'll stall just another minute or two. So formulate your questions if you all have one. Otherwise, this is our website. Again, weather.gov/moreheadcity is easier to remember. If we have any briefings, it would be down here at the bottom, weather hazard briefing. And I think they did put one up on, it's Nana now, but the tropical depression yesterday. So this is our one-page briefing on the current storm out in the ocean. It's a real short and sweet one because we don't expect impacts otherwise beyond the strong rip current threat. So that's how you can get that. I mentioned our website, and if you add hurricane prep, so weather.gov/moreheadcity or MHX, there's a hurricane prep page, and there's a lot of good information on here. It breaks down, Hurricane Awareness Week is back in May. So there's a day on determining your risk. So we talk about all the risks you can have, developing a plan. This is something you should do now. There's a link to the Know Your Zone campaign, explaining what storm surge is, what a watch versus a warning is, what are impacts. So that's the second day. Day 3, we talk about high winds, how to assemble your kits. So how to prepare your home itself, what you should have in your disaster kit. I know a lot of folks used to say 3 days worth of food, water, and medicine, but as we saw with Florence, a lot of us were without for 5, 6, 7 days. So we usually say a week now. Get your insurance checkup. That's something you should be doing now and not waiting until you're in the forecast cone per se. strengthening your home, there's different things you can be doing now. Taking down debris, loose limbs, trimming things up. And then we've got the graphic I showed you on Florence Tornadoes, because that is something you want to have another way to get warnings if you do decide to stay home. We've got something on helping your neighbors in rip currents, and then day 7 is finalizing your written plan. The whole point of the written plan is, it's like your goals for your workout or your diet. If you just think or say you're going to do it, it's not as successful as if you write down goals. Hey, I want to have an evacuation plan. This is what we're going to do, and you put that in writing. That's much better. So I do see a couple hands raised. So we'll get to you all in a second. Let's see if we have any verbal or written questions first. All right. So I see a bunch of people with their hands raised. So we'll try that way. So I'm going to call on your name, and then you can go ahead and I'll unmute you. So we've got Martha. Martha, I'm going to unmute your line. So you're unmuted, Martha. All you have to do is just unmute it on your end. Yep, you should be good to go, Martha.
Well, actually, I do not have a question. I just wanted to thank you for all the information in that website. I came aware of it because of Twitter.
Good.
I started to following you on Twitter. Through Twitter, I followed the links, and I realized all the information that you have. I go to the page. I have family in California, and I enter the name of the city. I know what the weather is in California. So in one page, I can find information about California's weather as well.
That's awesome, Martha. You made all of tonight worth it, because we want to hear those types of stories about how you find out that information. That's great.
So I do want to thank you for that, and for all the effort that has gone into collecting all that information, putting it out together for everybody to share, and that at least for me, it has been of great use.
That's great. Thank you, and share that. Share that with your family in California, and even those that are local. That's fantastic. And Martha, I appreciate it. I'll just go ahead.